Welcome back to Bunny Banter, the first and only podcast for everything Killer Bunnies. I'm your host Matt, here with co-host Mikey.
Hello.
And as a guest today, we have Chris.
Hey,
What are we talking about today, Mikey?
Today we are talking. Ooh, I guess I should mention that Matthew has started on the Bunny Banter Catechism. And so we are talking about Article 9 of the Bunny Banter Catechism, that is, of aggressive strategy.
Yes, so we will be talking about, this is the first episode of a 6-episode series on each of the categories of the passivity meta, that being aggressive, neutral, passive, and the 3 hybrids, of course. And Chris is excited.
I'm very excited.
So for each of these categories, we will be discussing specific proven strategies that we have found useful, at least at some point, in our own groups. And of course, this is supposed to be like a starting point for anyone who wants to further explore any of the categories, because the list is literally endless on what you can do within each category, so we are just providing a baseline, more or less. But before we get started, there's several disclaimers we have to say, especially with aggressive strategy, which is just in time for Halloween, because some of these strategies are quite spooky. It is quite common mid-game to villainize players for playing a specific strategy, especially the aggressive strategies. But in most cases, for some of these it definitely would be true, but for most cases, we don't have anything personally against the players who use aggressive strategies. Although with a few of these that's quite debatable. But we'll see if we get to them all, because I have a large list of strategies that we can consider on this episode, but we might not find the time to get to all of them. And something else I'd like to mention is that we do consider all of the categories within the passivity meta to be viable. What it really depends on is how your group is currently playing. So for example, right now at Tabletop Club, the group has transitioned to playing pretty much all pure passive. So perhaps these aggressive strategies would be a nice transition for players to start heading towards as the counter to the pure passive. Okay, let's get right into the discussion here. So for all these strategies, I have further categorized them into targeted strategies versus economic strategies. The very simple difference is a targeted strategy hurts your opponent, while economic strategy helps you. So it'll give you some economic benefit. So for the first strategy here, we have the backstab. It is a targeted strategy in which the player breaks an alliance with an opponent. So the idea is you made some sort of alliance, some sort of agreement with one of your opponents. You know, maybe you're working together on something, and then all of a sudden you decide to target them out of nowhere. Chris, how often have you seen this strategy?
well, it works pretty good when people don't actually know what you're doing. I've seen it a lot in our own private circles. I know Matthew and I have used this many times against certain friends that will go unnamed.
Cough, Luke.
Cough, Luke. It's rather entertaining the first time that it happens, but then you immediately become the enemy of the group. It just makes you might get short-term advantage from it, but it's not a long-term strategy, I would say.
In all fairness, a lot of aggressive strategy isn't long-term. As far as future games go. You know, after you use a backstab strategy, then the opportunities to form an alliance in future games are few and far between. Because no one will actually trust you.
Yeah, and whatever you did to backstab, you probably won't be able to use that exact situation again. Because people aren't going to fall for it.
Quite true. How often have you seen this strategy, Mikey? You play with a bit of a different group.
I can't say that I've actually seen this happen all that much. Um, there, I feel like I was recently though in a game with you because you're really the only person I ever play with, and I feel like I don't remember the exact situation, but I feel like that I was trying to create an unspoken alliance with you, and maybe we weren't even in an alliance and I was just being delusional, but you didn't follow through with that alliance. But because I hadn't said anything and it was unspoken, it didn't bother me as much. But if decide to make an alliance with somebody, um, like a verbal pact, um, and somebody, stabs you in the back, then that kind of doesn't make you feel all that great. I don't know necessarily that I would ever do that, but I don't tend to play terribly aggressive anyways. But if you have an unspoken alliance, or say there's just this great threat, there's one big threat, you're in a 3-player game, 2 people, there's one big threat. Well, the 2 people who want the threat to go away form an unspoken alliance. And then once the threat's kind of gone, then they go back to targeting each other. That's not necessarily bad, and I feel like that would kind of fall under the backstab. But it hurts a lot less. You're getting stabbed, say, with a pin versus a dagger or a sword.
Very good points. Very good points.
There's other situations too where if, let's say, Mikey and I were in an alliance, and Matthew finally doesn't have any bunnies left, and we were teaming up against him, and I draw misfortune, an aggressive player wouldn't naturally play it on himself. He would say, well, sorry, Mikey, it's just how the game goes, and he'd play it on his teammate instead.
Assuming it's a casting misfortune, of course.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to be playing on yourself.
Or I'm saying if I don't have a bunny either.
Oh, okay.
I suppose I don't know. I suppose there's nothing you can do. It's unintentional.
But you're not so sad about it.
You can't be purely. No, you can't be purely alliance with somebody all the time because there are those situations where, okay, yeah, you're gonna take a hit here because I can't do anything about it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. The backstab strategy. I was discussing this with Tyler the other day, and he'll actually be one of our guests for the 6th episode of the series on the aggressive passive strategies. We were discussing one of the other strategies here that's directly related, the non-aggression pact, which is economic strategy in which a player forms an alliance with another aggressive opponent. So in that context, unlike the type of alliance that Mikey was discussing that's very common, where 2 usually neutral players will team up against an aggressive player, the non-aggression pact is 2 aggressive players agreeing not to target each other so that they both can just be supreme in the game. They just have huge advantage over each other. And it should work in theory, but in practice, one of those aggressive players is probably going to backstab the other. It creates a very exciting dynamic, which you have to determine, do I want to be the more aggressive player by betraying my fellow aggressive player?
It's fun to watch.
Oh, it's quite fun to watch. How rotten of an aggressive player can you be? Oh yeah, the backstab, I can say, back in the day I played quite a bit of pure aggressive strategy. The backstab was just one of the very, very standard tools for aggressive strategy. It's very, very intuitive with how well it works. You know, if you're in a group that's primarily aggressive, it's going to work very well. So it's definitely something to explore if you want to work more with, experiment more with aggressive strategy. It's definitely a good baseline, you know, making alliances, but then breaking them as soon as it becomes beneficial for you to do so. I remember Joe one time mentioned making an alliance within the context of them knowing that as soon as it's beneficial for you to do so, you're going to break it. And in some sense, that still fits here, but by explicitly saying it's going to happen, you still don't know at which point. But by saying it's going to happen, it's less of a backstab, I guess. So maybe you can get away with it, possibly.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. It's always.
I feel like that's a viable thing. I mean, to say if you're in a pact with somebody and then you say, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to target you eventually," then at least they expect you coming and they're not trusting you to be their ally for eternity.
Yeah, there are some alliances that are meant for eternity, but this strategy existing just ruins all of those hopes. There's for some of these strategies we have like sub strategies that are directly included within these strategies, but more specific. And the one I have here, I called the final treason. And it's described as a backstab in which a player transitions from a passive strategy to an aggressive on the very last turn. So the idea is, as you're playing passive the entire game, so everyone has complete trust in you. You would never hurt a fly. Everyone just trusts you completely. You have a great reputation, but then secretly you have to have an excellent understanding of the end game in terms of tempo. Who's going to get carrots win, and then on the very last turn, when you have enough money to buy the last carrots, play something like the nuclear warhead, wipe out everyone else's bunnies, and you auto win. If you time it correctly. How often have you seen that, Chris?
Well, very often. When you play with our groups, we tend to have those specific cards that we save for the final few turns that can benefit us from eliminating a few players from the game. Even if you don't eliminate everybody, it's sometimes really nice just to eliminate a couple, just so you have a better chance of winning. Just if your opponent only has, on your left has one bunny and the other one has two, and then a couple other players have like 5 or 6, well, you're not going to be able to eliminate those 5 or 6, so you just kill a couple of the smaller people just to take them out of the game, just for the sheer point of making your chances greater. So the final treason doesn't even have to be a full scale kill. It just has to be that final, okay, that game is ending. Let's see how many people I can make mad.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it does. It makes some people very mad, especially in a full set game, because players have been playing for 3 to 4 hours if you're doing the full carrot count. Longer if you have slower players. And then all of a sudden, after that 3 to 4 hour time period, they have no opportunity in the end game. Then you just wiped them out on the final turn.
Most people don't care how many carrots they have. They just want to be part of the end count. So if you eliminate them from that's a pretty dirty play.
I think the biggest context I've done it in terms of player count, I think I've done the final treason in a 5-player game, and I believe it was either remix or starter set. I think it was starter set. But goodness, you feel like you have to take a shower after one of those games. It's so dirty. Everyone's just playing their own game, and then all of a sudden, last turn, wipe everyone out, buy the last carrot. Oh, by the way, I just won. Auto win scenario in a 5-player game, unheard of. Very rare. But if you can time it correctly, it's quite viable, at least for one game. Good luck winning the next one. How often have you seen it, Mikey, if at all?
I have never seen that happen, and I don't think I ever want to see it happen. And see, if you're playing passive, and then you suddenly just play aggressive at the very last turn, nobody's ever going to trust you playing passive again.
You would think not. You can gain your reputation back, but it takes a while.
Huh.
It's one of those strategies where it's in the really mean category of aggressive strategy. So if you do one of these really mean aggressive strategies, your reputation will be ruined for future games, and you won't be able to fully utilize any passive or maybe not even neutral strategy for a long time.
Yeah.
For several games, you know. I was able to do it eventually. I'm currently playing, well, I'm currently playing within a pure neutral context in most games. But for a while there, I was able to play pretty effectively in a passive context, even with the group that I had, a year ago done full treason against.
Mhm.
So you can be absolved of your aggressive sins eventually. You might have to go through some penance, but
Oh,
it does happen eventually.
mhm.
Passive penance.
If you play passive strategy long enough, people will eventually trust you, and then you can do full treason again. Uh,
Whee!
that's something to mention about some of these strategies will work more consistently than others. Some of the
Mhm.
really strong ones, like the full treason, or like some other ones on the list I have here, are sort of
Mhm.
like one-time things where you're only going to be able to actually get away with it. Like maybe if you're playing like, let's assume a couple games every month. Those probably
Yep.
aren't full set games, but let's just assume you're playing a couple games every month. Maybe you can get away with one of these big, excessively aggressive strategies once every 3 months or so would be a safe
Mhm.
bet. But it's when you do, it's very impactful, and people remember that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Anything else we wanted to say on backstabs before we move on to a different category of aggressive strategy here?
Don't do them.
Don't do them. That's what Mikey says. What does Chris say?
Mm. Do them till you get caught.
Until you get caught. Okay. Yeah. This is a discussion on if you want to play aggressive, should you be using the strategies? Are they viable? Mikey thinks they're not. Chris thinks they are. So depends on your
I
group.
I think
I think
I
it.
think
I think it
that
leads
they're
into our next couple
viable.
categories.
For sure.
I think the aggressive strategies are viable. I don't think that they're a good idea, but I think you can do them and you can succeed with them. I just say don't do them because being mean to people is bad.
Mikey likes keeping his friends.
Yeah.
Okay. Lesson learned. Let's see. I think backstab leads directly into false trades. Let me skip one on our list here for a second. Let's talk a little bit about the false trade. Now, the false trade is usually my example of a strategy whenever I'm discussing with people strategies that I won't use unless it's against certain people. Cough, Luke.
Yeah.
So the false trade is a targeted strategy in which a player trades the opponent a resource with full intention of making him lose it shortly after. So for example, let's say I trade let's take a really simple example first. I trade you a bunny for a carrot, and then my very next card is a weapon high enough to kill the bunny. Feels bad.
Mm.
Feels very sad. That is a very minor example. There are bigger examples that we'll get into in a second here. But Mikey, how often have you seen this type of trade?
I think I've probably seen it once or twice, um, but not a lot. But then again, I don't tend to play with very aggressive players. Now, an interesting thing about this strategy that you could play it, you could do this strategy and still appear to be neutral. And and how you do it, I think, is what you do is you wait until you're in a situation where there are only so many bunnies in the bunny circle. Let's say there are currently maybe like 4 bunnies in the bunny circle, and you want to play a card that affects 2 adjacent bunnies, a weapon. So what you do is you trade a bunny, one of your bunnies, to a person for a carrot. And so the way the game is set up now is the only way that you can play this weapon without targeting your own bunny that you still have is by laying it so that it ends up killing the bunny you just traded. And that way, you can still maybe appear to be neutral while doing the false trade.
Yeah, that's a very good point, is that there are minor scenarios where you can do something akin to a false trade within a neutral context, like Mikey just described. The bunny is getting hit by the ranged weapon. Maybe it won't die, who knows, but it was likely to get hit by the range. It was going to get hit by the ranged weapon regardless of if you traded it or not, so you just traded a bunny that has a likelihood of dying rather than a guarantee dying. There's a lot of noises on Chris's end again.
Are there?
Dumb. That's alright though. Where was I going with that? Yeah, so you can do false trade in a more minor context. For example, I was playing pure neutral variant in a recent remix game, and I did a very minor false trade against a passive opponent where I traded them a pawn for $3, knowing that the next player had pawn recall. So he lost $3, and I gained $3 for free. Now the fun fact about that is, this passive player also knew that pawn recall was coming. So within the passive context, he actually wanted to get rid of the dollar anyways. So I thought I was false trading him, but in reality he was just using next level passive strats and purposefully taking the false trade, completely knowing it was false. Which is a very strong passive strategy that will be discussed a few episodes from now. So you can use false trade within a neutral context. Usually, though, we tend to put it in aggressive context. Chris, how many times have you seen the false trade?
Well, in response to Mikey only seeing it 1 or 2 times, either he plays in a very passive circle or he is not catching them. Because this is one of my wheelhouse strategies. I don't think I would go a single game without at least trying to false trade somebody at least once. At least once. And if I get away with it, it continues to happen until they stop trading with me. Some really easy examples I think of right off the top of my head are, the easiest one, the most obvious and most practical one, I think, is when you don't have a bunny and you ask your opponent, could you trade me a bunny for such and such thing so I can play this card? And then they ask, well, what card are you going to play? And you're like, well, that's not really important. And then the card, of course, is to just totally destroy their board.
If you say
that's the really obvious
not really important, I'm not going to trade with you.
Well, no, but the idea is that you're somewhat smooth about it. You're not going to say that. But I'm just saying that for the sake of what you're thinking in your head. The other example I thought of was false trading. Oh, what was I going to say? I totally lost my thought. Wow. The other one I was thinking about is if you start trading possessions like a passive player, and then you play Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, disgusting.
That's one of those where it's like, well, why are you giving me all this stuff for basically nothing? Either you're being very passive and showing yourself to be a very passive player, or you have one big monumentous play you're about to do and just win the game as an aggressive player. So it can be done on the grand scale or the small scale. it's just a fun strategy. It's absolute fun strategy to see what you can get away with. You know, just like trading everybody, even if it's stupid, like, oh yeah, you can have all my cabbage if you don't attack me, and then just playing, you know, like maggots and totally just taking them away for no reason. I don't know. I think it's one of the greatest strategies in the game because it shows. It's kind of like playing poker in a way. You kind of are you bluffing? Do you have something? Do you have a alternative motive to this? What's actually going on? And this is where the big strategy of the game comes in.
Yeah, Chris mentioned some excellent examples of the false trade. I'm going to go. Atlas Shrugged is a really toxic example in a two-player game, and after it's happened to you once, it's never going to happen to you again. Perhaps a more viable context in 4 to 5 player game or something along that line, since Atlas Shrugged is very difficult to achieve in those contexts. Maybe you do the same thing with Switcheroo, since that would be likelier success. Or if you had Ice 9, you could do the Atlas Shrugged scenario, and that would be very mean. But then one false trade that I've always wanted to do, but never I never really took the opportunity to do it because I stopped playing pure aggressive before I had the opportunity or or I was able to get away with it, is a false trade involving Poverty Poker. And the idea is, or at least the theory, it hasn't actually been tested if you can get away with it. But the theory is that all of the opponents that you want to false trade, so let's just say it's a 4 player game, let's just assume you want to trick 2 of the opponents. The idea is you trade with them in such and such a way to make sure that their possessions are approximately equal. You know, they both have 3 bunnies and 7 carrots, for example. And you also have 3 bunnies and 7 carrots. And then you play after you've done all these trades to even out the playing field, which looks like a very common passive neutral strategy called the equalizer, very well respected. You play Poverty Poker and gamble everything they have, which is a lot. And of course, to set up this strategy, you of course want to have plenty of rerolls available, and you will. So then you have essentially stolen everything from 2 players after you've done plenty of trades with them. You've set it up perfectly so that you can steal literally everything from them. Another false trade I've always wanted to do, and this is taking a lower value card, which is really exciting, and making it really high value, is using the Scarlet Letter. Now, the Scarlet Letter, probably a less known card than Poverty Poker, since Poverty Poker's in starter set. Scarlet Letter it forces an opponent to discard either all of their run cards or all the cards with the letter A in them. So the false trade that utilizes Scarlet Letter that I have yet to get away with and haven't attempted it recently since I've stopped playing pure aggressive is to trade them a really high value run card or card with the letter A in it from your hand. So for example, if you have Ice 9, the stereotypical high value run card, you trade it to an opponent for some relevant, probably dollar amounts, probably carrots, because this card is going to get them $200 value. You might as well get $100 from them. You know, if you combine Ice 9 with super supplies, trade with a player with super supplies. And then you play Scarlet Letter on them and immediately make them discard that Ice 9 that they just traded $100 for. Feels bad. Really sad day. You just traded $100 for Ice 9 and I just made you discard it. With this seemingly useless Scarlet Letter card.
I think it's really fun when it's towards the end of the game and you're able to get the last carrot to make people think they're actually in the game when they're not. Combining the last treachery with false trading.
Yeah.
So the idea is you start, you can sell them. You sell them bunnies for some of their money, and then you finish off their bunnies with your final run card. and then you have more money than everyone else.
Yeah, that's a very, very strong, very, very well tested use of the false trade is trading someone who's desperate for bunnies in the end game. A lot of your bunnies, and then having the nuclear warhead ready, and now having enough money to buy the rest of the carrots.
Or you can just ask Kaylin how that went.
Yeah, Kaylin found out how that one went. And
Never
Kaylin,
played again.
that was Kaylin's first game on a starter set game, and she cried afterwards.
Oh dear.
And that
What happened was I traded her. I had what I did was I had her trade me half her carrots for a bunny so that
Mhm.
she would be eligible at the end. And she did not win at the end.
Well, that was involving a little bit of prophecy strats too.
Because what happened was she gave away the winning carrot.
Oh my.
Feels really sad.
I have too much power. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Chris made Kaylin cry, and that's married life for you. She for some reason still married him after that.
Rip.
Oof. Do we want to spend the time to talk about the Nigerian prince, or is that one too toxic for it to reveal?
They're not ready.
They're not ready. Okay, Chris decided. We're going to skip that one. I don't want the community to know it because I don't consider it viable. Let's go on. Oh yeah, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say it's borderline cheating.
I mean,
It classifies you from aggressive player to dirtbag very fast.
I mean, it literally involves lying. At least the false trade, you're being honest. Yeah. The Nigerian prince, you literally have to lie to your opponents. And
Yeah.
us here at Bunny Banter do not consider sinning a viable strategy.
Oof.
Oof.
Unless you're playing with Jeff.
I'm not going Nigerian prince, Jeff. Oh, that'd be so mean. Oh, okay.
Oh man.
So we're not going to reveal what the Nigerian prince is. Let's just say
That could be our discussion question for the end of the show. If anyone can tell us what the Nigerian prince strategy is, there will be a prize.
There will be a prize. Okay.
And then we could be like Nigerian princes.
And then we could not send the Swiffer.
We could take
Ooh,
their
that's
money.
spoilers. Spoilers.
It's
Okay.
illegal. But have to sing the Kyrie.
We will. Okay.
Anybody that tells us what the Nigerian prince strategy will receive a prize.
You
If that
will
is not clue
receive.
enough, if that is not clue enough what the Nigerian prince actually is, you will understand shortly.
It's based on. Yeah. Okay. That pretty much sums it up. Let's go into the. Let's go into. There's two more categories I want to go into, and they're both pretty large. So let's just move right into them. The one here is intimidation, which is probably what I consider one of the most viable / proven strategies within the aggressive category. And intimidation has several subcategories. So let me just start with the base one here. Intimidation is described as a targeted strategy in which the player manipulates an opponent under threat. So this type of strategy is very common where you'll see, let's say for example, I threaten to play the laser gun on Mikey. Now of course the laser gun doesn't have a guarantee of killing the bunny, it's only a 75% chance ignoring rerolls. But it will likely kill the bunny. So I tell Mikey, if you don't give me $6, I'm going to play this on you. And at that point, Mikey needs to make the decision: do I want to take the 25% chance to have a bunny, or do I want to guarantee you lose $6? That
would actually be a poor example because defense cards don't cost that much, and you probably would have used defense cards.
Well, yes, defense cards are very efficient, yes. But intimidation can apply to any type of aggressive targeting. The weapon is just a simple example. So let's pretend that Mikey had not planned ahead and had not bought defense cards. Or both.
No, I'm just saying, I was playing devil's advocate. All I meant was $6, the equivalent of saving the bunny with defense cards if you had defense cards. So trading your $6 away isn't that bad.
It's punishing Mikey for not purchasing the defense cards beforehand, essentially.
Yeah, it's giving the money to Matthew instead of the bank.
Yeah. So how often do you see the strategy, Mikey?
Actually, I think I see this one more. And I also think that, I mean, like I said before, I think pretty much all these are viable options. But this is one that I would utilize this, depending on what, whether I was playing passive, neutral, neutral, aggressive, whatever I felt like doing at the time. This is one of the more aggressive strategies that I feel like I would utilize because, like you said, I like to keep my friends. And so this doesn't necessarily make your friends hate you, like backstabbing or false trading. They know what's coming if they don't give you what you want. So yeah, I've seen this one more often than the other ones. Going back to the false trading for just a brief second, when Chris said, that I either play with a lot of really passive people or I just don't notice it, but the people I do play with tend to be more on the passive neutral. There aren't many like aggressive players that I play with. Especially since Matt has newly discovered the pure passive strat, and has been utilizing them. But this is one that I have seen more often, and one that I would use in a more neutral, aggressive situation.
Very true, yeah. What I really like about the intimidation, including all the subcategories, is that we'll get into the subcategories in a second here, but what's really strong about intimidation is the subcategories all look very similar with how they seem to be threatening you, but they're all very different in their intentions, and we'll get into that. But first, Chris, how often do you see intimidation tactics used?
Quite a bit, and it can be even expanded on. I think we're probably going to talk about it. I might be dipping my toe in where I shouldn't be, but you can ask Mikey for $6 not to attack him, but maybe your intent to start with was to attack the other person anyway. And then you false traded and you intimidated at the same time.
Very true. That goes right into the first subcategory we have here, which a friend of mine termed the Godfather, which it's intimidation which the player intended to carry out the threat on someone else anyways. So the idea is I threaten to target Mikey for unless he gives me $6. But in reality, I actually want to target Chris the whole time, so I just got Mikey to give me a free bribe to target Chris, even though if he hadn't given me the bribe, I would have still targeted Chris.
Yeah, the only disadvantage to that is you've now created two enemies rather than one.
It's possible.
Depends. Because if I paid the $6 because you made me an offer that I couldn't refuse, and then you play the weapon on Chris, I think that was the situation, then I don't feel necessarily all that terrible because I didn't get the weapon played on me. And even if I didn't pay the $1, I still didn't get the weapon played on me. But I guess I could see where you're coming from now that I say it out loud. But I feel like paying the $6 that I have accomplished something. That you are offering me a trade. You are going to play this on me. And then you said, but I won't play it on you because you're going to give me $6. I'll play it on Chris instead. So then I think, that's a good idea. He's a nice guy. He's not going to play that on me if I pay him money. So then I feel good about myself. You feel good about yourself. Chris feels bad about himself. We all win.
That's right. I see this as
See
an
A
absolute
Bug's
win.
Life. Just go watch A Bug's Life. See how that works out.
Now,
Yes, the grasshoppers take the food so they can protect the ants, but in reality, they were just taking the food to feed the grasshoppers.
I suppose. The scenario I like to use if I'm playing pure aggressive or even neutral aggressive, the scenario I like to use the Godfather strategy is where it looks like it's justifiably better to target Mikey. But in reality, I have other motives where I want to target Chris. For example, if Mikey has 3 bunnies and Chris has 1, it will look natural to target Mikey. But in reality, I'm really scared of Chris's next card. I think he has a big weapon coming up. So I actually want to target Chris. But since it looks natural to target Mikey, I'll just target him first, get some free dollar out of it, and then target Chris.
I like trading for carrots.
There you go. Carrots works as well. Anything really. Or even doing something like, oh, if you don't play your next 2 weapons on me, I won't play my next 2 weapons on you. That's taking the intimidation and mixing it with non-aggression pact. That is also a way you can manipulate your opponents in that sense. I'm going to skip a little bit here because another one of these strategies looks very similar to the 2 we just talked about, and that is what I call nuclear chess. Now in this case, it's an intimidation in which you have no intention of carrying out the threat. Now let me give an example here so it's clear what type of scenario we talk about. Let's pretend that there are 5 bunnies out in the bunny circle, and one of them is yours. You threaten to play the nuclear warhead, because obviously that would kill 4 of your opponent's bunnies and 1 of your own, so that's a good deal. You want to play the nuclear warhead, right? No, because your next card is way too important to play the nuclear warhead. So therefore, rather than just discarding it, you decide, since it looks like you want to play it, to have all your opponents give you a small bribe, which will add up to a large bribe of course, to not play it. And all of a sudden, you have all of this free money, and you never want to play the card anyways. How often, perhaps the question isn't how often have you seen it, perhaps the question is how often have you recognized it, because it's very difficult to see if you're not looking for it. How often have you recognized it, Chris?
A couple times. It gets obvious the first time it happens. Like, wait, we just paid him just to discard a card. This is awkward. What's he planning? Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah. The aggressive player is hoping that usually in this type of context, first of all, the aggressive player has to hope that they actually give you the bribe, because if they don't, then all of a sudden you have to decide, it's like poker. Is this a value bet? Is it a bluff? There's no such thing as a value bluff. So if they don't take the bluff, then you have to decide, do I follow through with this threat to make sure that they give me the bribe next time? And then my plan was just ruined. Or do I discard it and then they all realize that was a bluff anyways? So it creates a very difficult scenario where if they call you out on your bluff. But that's the strength of it, is that it looks so similar to the Godfather strategy or to the standard intimidation strategy. How often have you recognized it, Mikey, if at all?
I don't know. I don't remember many scenarios where somebody has asked me to pay for them not to play a card. There have been a couple times, but I don't remember one where it's been like asking the whole group to pay not to play a card. So I probably haven't recognized it all that much if it has happened. That's interesting.
It's a very strong strategy if it works. I highly recommend it
If it works.
for anyone attempting to improve their aggressive strategy. In fact, anything within intimidation. I always point to whenever players are looking for stronger aggressive strategy, because aggressive strategy is probably the most common strategy within the uneducated community. And they're missing out on a lot of potential strategies that they don't realize because they're tunnel visioning on the simple stuff. But intimidation is one of those staple aggressive strategies I always point to. Nuclear chess is very strong if you pull it off, because all of a sudden you did what you want to anyways by discarding the card, and you got all this free stuff. And everyone thinks you're nice because you discarded the card. And if you pull it off really well.
But if it fails, that can be bad for you.
If it fails, what
That's
I would
the
usually
problem.
do if they call me out on my bluff, I'll usually play the card anyways, because that will gain me a reputation as someone who should be feared.
Yeah, you can't just not play it. It's otherwise you'll never get that advantage later.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it requires the reputation as a very intimidating, aggressive player, which leads directly into another category of intimidation here, which I called looming presence, which is the idea of just your very existence, just your reputation, is what's the threat. So, for
That's you.
example, this is a very
You have a
common
leading break.
strategy for me, or sometimes a downside for me, where it's just because of my knowledge of the game and because I am the owner of the game in our group, I am therefore the most intimidating opponent. And sometimes that's to
I
my
definitely
benefit.
can be categorized there too.
Yeah. Sometimes that's to your benefit, and sometimes it's not.
I feel like Jeff also probably has a looming presence because he created the game, and so he's. But I think that it kind of backfires on him because he's talked about how he's always targeted when he plays because he's has this looming threat that, oh, he created the game, he knows everything about the game, which he has said on multiple occasions he does not. Uh, um, and so, but everyone assumes that he does. And so instead of people being afraid of him and letting him do whatever he wants, they're so afraid of his looming presence and his intimidation that they target him all the time and he can't get anything done.
Yeah, I have to give Jeff a lot of credit on him using the aggressive strategy, because from what he's described, it seems like he uses intimidation and manipulation quite a lot in his strategy, which fits directly with this idea of looming presence, trying to take advantage of that. Where, if he recommends someone do a specific strategy, maybe you should target this person because they have a triplet. They're likely to respect his knowledge of the strategy and therefore go along with it, even if it would have been better to target him, but they're probably scared of targeting him. I've had several instances with players on the Discord where people will be scared of me. They don't want to upset the Killer Bunnies god and have his wrath come down upon them. So they will not target me. I've had scenarios where I have a red gleeful bunny, for Pete's sake, and someone else that just has a standard bunny, and they will target the standard bunny and completely ignore the red gleeful out of fear of retaliation.
I clearly have to play more in the group just so you get neutralized.
Well, you remember, Chris, when you tried on that 3-player game. I
Yeah.
was playing my aggressive passive variant, and once you killed my Kinder Bunny, oof, it was all out, full on aggressive, and then the third player traded me a Kinder Bunny to satisfy my wrath. Those were his exact words. So it definitely is a very functional strategy if you have the reputation.
Why do I have a slight feeling we're gonna start putting kinder bunnies on the underground stations, and you're just gonna watch them travel from place to place just for the sake of them traveling from place to place.
No,
Yeah, give the Kinder Bunny the oyster cracker because the Kinder Bunny is objectively the highest value bunny in the game. And we should share it with everyone.
here's something interesting about this Kinder Bunny obsession that Matt has. See, if you can use this to your advantage, so anybody who ever plays with him on the Discord or anything, you can use the Kinder Bunnies to your advantage, and here's how. He won't target them, at least directly. He will kind of
It
manipulate
might as well say cannot be
times.
targeted by Matthew.
I will steal them.
Yeah, he will steal them, and he will do things. He will manipulate the game sometimes so that you are forced to do something that causes you to harm or get rid of your own Kinder Bunnies. But he will not directly target your Kinder Bunnies. So, the best strategy is to only have Kinder Bunnies. The end.
Assuming I'm using my aggressive passive variant, which is called, fittingly called Kinder Protection Services. Although I've been experimenting with pure neutral recently, so no guarantee I'm using that strategy. It's quite fun though, and quite toxic. Okay, let's see. We have one more subcategory in intimidation here, and that is the category we call immortality. It's a little bit different than the others. The idea is you create a near unstoppable defensive position so that nobody has any points in targeting you. So the idea is you have Forever Fed, you have all the defense cards, you have Bunny Detroit, so they can't target you with any aggressive cards. You probably have a Jarnac in between two opponents, and you probably
Heavenly Halo.
Pink Lethal with Heavenly Halo or something like that, and you're just there generating dollar, and no one can really do anything about it. It's the idea. Or at
It's
least
that point of the
everyone's
game where they're just trying to establish themselves so they can stay in the game.
Yeah, it's the scenario where they could do so much more damage if they targeted a different opponent, and if they're too scared to target you because you're too far ahead. How often have you seen this one, Mikey?
I just dropped my phone. My phone's made entirely out of glass, and I still haven't broken it yet.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm gonna knock
impressive.
on wood now. Anyway, I feel like I've seen this a few times. Generally, though, if somebody's really far ahead, that's the one person that's always targeted. I'm thinking about this strategy, this immortality.
You accomplished it once.
I did. I don't remember when, but I believe I did.
Clarissa gave it to you. Your second full set game, I believe. You had Pup-tastics with several clovers and Forever Fed and all that nonsense.
See, I don't necessarily know if I would agree that this is an aggressive strategy, or at least not an extremely aggressive strategy. Because if you have like the Jarnac and the Heavenly Halo as a part of this strategy of immortality, it also limits what you can do as well. Perhaps it's not chaotic aggressive, or maybe it's not even, I don't know if we have labeled this, but like an evil aggressive or a sadistic aggressive. But because this can tend to limit you, I don't know how aggressive this one is, which is interesting because, and I guess I never really thought of this as an intimidation tactic either, because say when you have Pup-tastics or something, people are going to want to target you, or if you have specific cards besides the Jarnac and the Heavenly Halo, people are going to not necessarily be intimidated into submission by you, but intimidated and afraid, so they're going to target you more.
Possibly, or perhaps they should.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they don't, though. For example, let's take a simpler example. Let's say I have a large amount of defense cards, and you're thinking about targeting me with a weapon because I am quote unquote winning. But instead I say, you know, that weapon's not really going to do much. I'm just going to use these defense cards anyway, so maybe you should target this player instead. I have manipulated you because of my value, my economic status. I have manipulated you to target Chris.
But see, I have this philosophy, and so I know some people don't. But if somebody has a lot of cabbage cards or a lot of water, as long as they don't have infinity cabbage, infinity water, then that infinity cabbage and infinity water might have fit under this immortality one. But if you had a lot of defense cards, I would target you still to limit the amount of defense cards you have. Because other people are going to target people without the defense cards. But if you target the person with a lot of defense cards, eventually their resources are limited, and that gets rid of all the defense cards that they have, and other people can't use them then.
Eventually, but there's 40 defense cards in the game after London. So let's take a more extreme example. Somebody made the Rooney's Emporium low prices and bought all 40 defense cards with $40, which is reasonable, a very reasonable amount within full set. Are you still going to target them with weapons?
I don't know. I would have to be in that situation. It would depend on how I'm interacting with the other players.
That's
What do you
where
think,
your
Chris?
feed the bunnies come in. I think the people that know what we're talking about are the ones that play two-player often. If you don't play two-player, you don't see it as often, but two-player, I can guarantee every other game there will be a point of the game where somebody is extremely way ahead.
Matthew, all the time, two-player games.
And I think an easier way to describe this is not necessarily immortal, but you could call it building your castle. You just keep playing bunnies because you draw them.
Yeah.
You magically draw your ranks, and you magically have the Heavenly Halo show up. And pretty soon you have this 10 bunnies, a couple of them have clovers, and it's not like you were trying to achieve this. You just kind of played the cards you were drawn. And pretty soon you have this unwieldy board, and you're playing 4 cards per turn because you drew, what's the card? I know it. The 4 card per turn. You know what I'm talking about, Matthew? The 4 run
Calcite
card.
Conundrum.
And you have that too. And pretty soon you just have all the advantage, and you have this giant board. And this happens in two-player much more often, because there's only one person that's really opposing you, versus 3, 4, 5 players that are opposing you. I mean, it's much easier to take down the castle with a team. But you can draw misfortunes all you want, but you're only going to lose 1 bunny out of your 10.
Yeah. An argument to make declaring this to be aggressive would be that it does require a team of usually neutral players to take it down, which is a very common aspect of aggressive strategy. Whether it belongs in intimidation or not, debatable. It can be used within intimidation context, and it does succeed within intimidation context a lot of the time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. A lot of the times it combines with looming presence, and it's implied in intimidation. It's like, yeah, there's really no point targeting me. Maybe don't say it directly, but people are just targeting you less, and you just happen to notice, and you just make sure not to point it out. Okay, I'm going to skip Supreme Ruler because that's also a toxic strategy. And since Chris wanted to specifically talk about min-maxing, so we'll move on to that since we're running a bit short on time here. So min-maxing is described as an economic and targeted strategy in which the player focuses on maximizing the value of his cards and minimizing the value of opponent's cards. Very straightforward strategy. I think we can go straight into the first two here. For example, we would declare carrot acceleration to be a strategy focused on directly maximizing your carrot count, and delay of game would be focusing on minimizing your opponent's carrot count using things like Wheels Freshest Center. I think we can all safely say that we have seen these types of economic strategies. Mikey has used delay of game before. As he always likes to bring up the scenario where he played Wheels Freshness Center on me after I traded him enough dollop to buy the last remaining carrots. Yeah. Very nice. Chris, how viable do you think the strategy is?
When it works, it works. I mean, I've played games with you where I think we went through the carrot pile 3 separate times because you were playing the delay cards and I was playing the accelerating cards. And we probably went through 80 carrots.
It was 120, I believe.
120. Well, I was being modest. Okay. Well,
still
I
ended
won
in
that
under
game.
2 hours.
Yeah, but yeah, we book when we play. I mean, we're familiar enough with all the cards. We don't need to spend time reading and thinking about it.
Two fast
half the
players
time.
can finish the game pretty quickly.
I enjoy min-maxing. I think so even if it stops your opponents, and you can think about the invulnerability or whatever we call it. If you're able to limit your opponent's plays at the same time while gaining your board, that's really the essential grounds of min-maxing. If you have a rank and maybe a triplet, you can play a weapon on your opponent's bunny when they play it, and you can draw 2 carrots the next turn. Like, it's just a cycle of, yep, eliminate the threat, gain the carrots. Eliminate the threat, gain the carrots. And pretty soon you have 30 carrots and they don't have a bunny yet.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward strategy, honestly. Carrot acceleration is because
I think it's how a lot of beginners start out playing without knowing it.
yeah, essentially, it's very common. There are ways you can build on it. For example, players who are have explored carrot acceleration further will focus on trades for carrots. You know, a lot of the time, some players might not value carrots in the early game, so you can fairly easily trade for those carrots and make sure that you have the most carrots at all times. Delay of game is also directly related to that, although delay of game tends to be more within the context of, oh, this player has the most carrots, let's make sure to make them lose all their carrots, which would seem like a neutral strategy, but is often portrayed as aggressive because typically players do not want to play an extra hour. They don't like the idea of adding an hour to 2 hours to gameplay, so they tend to target a player just because they did a delay of game strategy. Which is why we place it under aggressive strategy here. Let's see, what else did I want to say on that? Oh yeah, another aspect of carrot acceleration is since you're focusing on maximizing carrot count, a lot of the time you will see if these players have a very good understanding of the end game, they can do something similar to the final treason, but more within the aggressive context naturally, not playing passive the whole time. If they properly understand the tempo of the end game, then they can very easily eliminate 1 or 2 opponents from the game and make sure that they have the most dollar and gain those carrots. So they're always looking for, you know, it seems like all players should be looking for an opportunity to maximize their carrots in theory, but in practice, it's usually the aggressive players that are doing so most often. And then finally here we have, in the min-max category, we have the category that we describe as the freight train. Choo-choo, get off the tracks. And And that's the idea, Chris mentioned it earlier, of maximizing your tempo. So the more cards you can play per turn, the better. These types of players will usually play, if they get a triplet in their opening hand, they're probably playing a turn one, honestly. It's just the thing to do.
It's the dream for these players is to get Calcite Conundrum, double rank, and 2 triplets on board just to be safe.
Well, that's only 6 cards. Add trips to that, and you can go literally infinite.
Yeah. And then everybody else around the circle is just sitting there waiting as they play their 6 cards per turn.
I feel like that kind of falls under delay of game too, because
Well-
right here you are playing all of these cards, and then everybody hates you because it takes forever.
What happens is you only have 3 cards in your hand, so you do the ranks first and say, okay, weapon here, draw 2, up, money, draw 2, up, another rank, draw 1. Oh yeah, run, set, your turn. Oh, by the way, I played Baker Street, so you're skipped, and we're playing 2 players, so I get to go again.
It's debatable whether or not it falls under delay. I think it indirectly falls under delay of game, because in theory, you playing cards and your opponent playing cards should gain approximately the same amount of cards per round. If I play 6 cards and you play 6 cards, the amount of cards just on average will be equal gained. So if I'm playing 6 cards and you would have played 6 turns, it would have been the same. How it actually causes delay of game is that it will discourage all of the opponents, so they will inherently play slower on their turns. I've seen instances where the most I've ever played is 11 cards on a turn, and that was in a 2-player game, of course. So you're not going to get that context in any other scenario, but with trips, of course. And what was funny is, because of that indirect delay of game, my 11 cards took less time than my opponent's 1 card. Because my opponent would go do something else while I was playing my turn, and then I'd have to wait for them to come back. They'd have to look at the board, figure out what on earth I did, and they'd eventually play their turn, and it was just discarding a card anyways.
Oftentimes, opponents get pooped on in this situation, and it's not healthy for players that like to take their time in a game and talk around the circle and have fun in general.
Yeah, but this is
Because it feels like someone has achieved some other form of level of the game.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you experience the peddler in Dominion for the first time.
No one's gonna get
For
that
those that-
reference.
No, somebody will, and they're gonna be like, ooh.
Peddler, 5 actions.
What?
You've played
It,
12 cards in
Yeah.
your turn. I played 1. What?
yeah. The concept of milling becomes a whole new game. I mean, once you achieve that level of Killer Bunnies, you thrive to do it again.
Very true. It's very difficult to achieve in anything 4 players or more, though. At least anything bigger than the context of 3 cards per turn, we'll say. 4 cards per turn, scary. It relates, of course, directly to the immortality category, where if you get to this immortal state where you have all this tempo, spooky. Everyone's scared. You're playing.
Although it does make you a huge target for Atlas Shrugged.
Well, yes, but for a 6-player game, that's Atlas Shrugged isn't going to happen.
That's true.
Especially since you're statistically drawing more mysterious places than your opponents, so you likely have power over Ice 9. Very, very, very spooky.
This is where you say, "Well played, Scoop."
Well played. Yeah, the freight train, if the freight train gets going, you're not going to be able to stop it. But it does create, in order to stop the freight train, usually 3 players teaming up is sufficient. So that's why the game's always balanced at 4 or more. As long as you have 3 players, as long as they're not in some trips category level stuff where they're playing 11 cards per turn, theoretically your minimum of 3 cards should be able to stop this opponent. Should. Let's hope there's no Zarnak.
Oh,
That would be scary.
could you imagine
Bit-
playing Zarnak in a 2-player game?
It's
It's
done.
been done. It's been done.
The Zarnak and
Unfortunately.
the 2-player Zarnak becomes a scenario where whoever's generating more dollar per turn will win. The 3-player becomes a scenario where only 1 player will lose. Unless Frank played the 2-player Zarnak, in which case he gets ultimate respect, and then I make Mikey lose instead.
That was awful.
Disgusting.
That was terrible. The
You have
way
to-
that you figured out how to target my bunnies anyway,
Yeah.
that was hurtful.
Yeah, it's just casually drawing 5 out of 6 breakdown bunnies in the draw pile, fair and balanced.
Oh,
I've never done that before.
Yeah.
I like drawing all the law enforcements in the same game.
Oh, disgusting.
That's just my cup of tea. That's just my thing. Oh yes, you can draw next because we're both drawing money anyways. Oh yes, law enforcement bunny.
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
casually.
Ah yes,
Oh,
another one. Ah yes, another one.
Deck
Wow.
tracking to make sure you draw the.
Does
law
3 law
enforcements.
enforcement bunnies mean I have a triplet? Ooh.
That'd be 2. You only need 2 for that.
That is true.
Disgusting.
Go
Man,
home.
I think we have established aggressive strategy is disgusting. No.
yes, burn it.
Burn it. Uh,
Heresy, burn it.
we need
it,
aggressive strategy is a necessary part of the game. It is viable. And in groups where it is used, it will often be targeted in terms of strategies that counter it. For example, the aggressive neutral strategy is a very common initial counter to an aggressive group. And then my aggressive passive strategy has been, the Kinder Protection Services has been quite successful at eliminating aggressive players. And Frank's passive neutral philosophy has completely converted our tabletop club group to pure passive, when a few of them were aggressive and most of them were neutral.
See, then your aggressive strat is not necessarily a necessary part of the game. Because
Not
you can have
necessarily.
everyone play passive.
You could endlessly play passive, but at some point, some players will decide, oh, everyone's playing passive all of a sudden. How about us 2 players agree to form a non-aggression pact and play pure aggressive to counter them, and then they can't win unless they transition.
There you go.
That's the thing about Killer Bunnies strategy, is that it's a constantly shifting meta. So although aggressive strategy may not be viable in your group currently, it probably will be at some point. I know our tabletop club group is getting close to that point, and Tyler and I may be planning a non-aggression pact.
Ooh.
Which will be scary because it's been a while since I played pure aggressive, and I'm glad we didn't have time to cover what I consider the absolutely most toxic don't use these strategies categories on this list, because I don't want to share them. You should not be playing them. It's not okay.
full cutthroat. How I miss thee.
Oh, Full Cutthroat. The story with Full Cutthroat, I won't say what it is, but I've played it twice. The one time, the story that Full Cutthroat goes is 2 players decided to Nigerian prince me, so I went Full Cutthroat on their 2-player alliance, and they conceded after 4 rounds. 4 rounds concede after being ahead in the alliance in a 3-player game. That's why we don't share Full Cutthroat.
The same argument can be made for getting guys to talk about girls during the conch being played. It works every time.
The conch is in the same category, actually.
Oh man. Oh yes, casually lose 150 turns. Congratulations. You
Yeah,
lost
I
the
did that to
game.
Isaac. He was very, very sad.
I don't think he's ever played Crypto since.
I don't think so. He played Remix.
Yeah. Actually after that game, he told me he didn't want to play full set again. So
Yeah. Conk is toxic. Anything else you want to say on aggressive strategy before we close?
Somebody's
Don't
got to
do
do it.
Somebody's gotta do it, says Chris. Mikey says nobody's gotta do it.
don't do it. It's a bad idea. You have no friends. Everyone knows you.
I have friends.
Do you? Or do they just pretend to be your friends because they're intimidated by you?
Oh,
Perhaps.
It's a
Oh.
false trade.
it's a false trade. Oh,
What I really appreciate doing false trades is false profit shamanism.
false profits, Robin. Okay.
Ah yes, low is the winning carrot. Wink, wink.
There was a line, Spirit among the prophets. I traded $120 for Hikaru. Although that was aggressive passive strat, so it's completely intentional. Okay, with that, thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully it helped you develop your aggressive strategy. I'm glad we didn't have time for the really toxic aggressive strategy. If you want more on that,
We might have to.
you can
We might have to have a
contact me.
part 2.
We need a part 2 on aggressive, maybe at the end. Okay. So thank you everyone for watching. We will continue the series on the Passivity Meta for the next 5 or apparently 6 episodes if we want to add the toxic aggressive as though that is a separate strategy. But if you have any topic ideas, you feel free to send them in. We'll get them in after the series. Or if you would like to be a potential future guest, feel free to let me know. Although we already have the guests lined up for this 5 episodes. We will fit you in at some point. And as has been said, sending me a homing pigeon is the best way to contact me. Or if you do not have a homing pigeon on hand, probably on the Discord. Anything you'd like to say, Mikey?
Yes, I do have something to say. Jeff bless.
Jeff bless.